Many see progress and environmental protection as competing priorities, where one must always be chosen over the other. At ELOS, we see things differently. We see a partnership, a balance between improving the quality of our lives and preserving the places we call home. Our services make it possible for projects to move forward while also ensuring that they comply with all laws and regulations, that sensitive wetlands are not damaged or destroyed, that endangered species and habitats are protected, and that invaluable cultural resources are preserved for future generations. This is where we live, where we play, where we raise our families. We strive for a brighter future, but remain committed to the lands we love. ELOS, where natural environments and human interests intersect.
Good afternoon. I am happy to join you today. Our first slide is just a little bit about our company. If you're not familiar with ELOS Environmental, we did have our roots in environmental issues, but we have certainly expanded to lots of different realms, including both program and grant management. And that is my specialty here. I have been with ELOS for just about a year now. But my background is very rich in both grant writing and grant management. Prior to joining ELOS, I worked for the city of Hammond, where I started actually as a grants writer and then formed a standalone department. I was later promoted to director of administration, so I have a broad background in city management, budgeting, and overall compliance. At ELOS, I'm a senior project manager and lead our grant efforts. We originally considered focusing this presentation on grant research and writing. However, there's so much changing in those areas right now. In fact, just a couple of months ago, I wrote several grant applications for a client, submitted them, and then a week later, the entire grant program was canceled. So today we're trying to focus on best practices in grant management, something that we think maybe is a little more stable right now, and we're focusing on three key areas: documenting decisions, grant compliance, and agency coordination. Now, for some of you who've been in grants for a long time, some of this may seem like old news to you, but I find that it's really good to have reminders for why we do what we do and how we do what we do. One of the best practices of grant management always involves documenting decisions. Think of this as organizing the chaos that starts from the very beginning of a grant award, and it needs to start then. But as we all know, sometimes you may get brought into the project later, well after it has started, maybe even months or years after it has started. And you're going to have to make sense of that chaos that might be there. Knowing which way the program auditors and your own auditors prefer is a good starting point. You want to decide how you're going to organize both the hard copy files and the electronic files, because as we know in this day and age, the electronic files can sometimes just grow exponentially. At the very beginning, file names and numbers should be established early and then carried consistently throughout. If you decide to change one way or the other, then you'll want to change your entire documents, all of your documents and all of your grant file, so that they remain consistent and easy to follow. In fact, thinking about that access, just one person's desk or computer holding all of those files is going to result in total failure. A common access point is always better for the staff involved and then for the program staff and the auditors who will come behind you. Another key element of documenting decisions is about showing those decisions. Remember that you're creating a trail for anyone to be able to follow. Those who may work on the project daily and those who may come 3 years after closeout. I always find that saving more rather than less is better. Save emails if they've got your questions and answers and discussion that happened over the files. Try to use accessible formats and file types in case whatever email program you're using today may be different than the one that you use a year from now. Saving those kinds of files in PDFs or more stable extensions is a great idea. Think about Outlook files do not open in Gmail. InDesign files really don't work well in Word. And then there's those GIS files that, unless they're actually a PDF, nobody can open them, even though the GIS guys continue to say that you can. Most importantly, you want to try to connect those dots. So within the file, we've all been in that situation where we inherit someone else's work, whether it's their files on their computer, whether it's their paperwork. It's almost a nightmare trying to figure out and read their mind about how they named things and why they did it that way. So try to be nice to those people who will follow you. Don't just have a procurement file that has your bids in it and the licenses of the companies or contractors. Try to have a summary document within that file that ties everything together and explains their purpose and why they're there. Try to use a tracking spreadsheet that is organized by just date and task, how many times you touched the files, what you did on different dates. That will help later, again, when somebody else may come to that file, whether it's your own auditors or whether it's someone from the main program or the federal or state government. And in fact, we know too that our project management software can change too. So just a basic spreadsheet will help out in the end. Another key aspect of documenting decisions is to, if there's ever any doubt in what you should do and how you should do it, ask permission, not forgiveness. Now, I know some of us might do differently in our regular lives, but in the grant world, there is always accountability. I always joke that grants are like using grandma's money. Grandma has a very specific list about what she wants, and she has a very long memory. She will know that if you did something wrong, she will remember that later, and she may not give you as much money to take in the future. So grants work just that same way. You've got to make sure that you are documenting as you go and that you're asking permission before making that decision. Another key aspect in the grant world is, of course, compliance. There are always lots of guidance documents, lots of forms, lots of examples of what to do and when to do it and how to do it. Grants are definitely not a choose your own adventure exercise. They are very specific. In fact, think about it this way. When you filed your taxes this year, did you go take the 1040 form and fill out the pieces that you wanted to, or just edit the form and change some of the boxes? Probably not. And you shouldn't do it on the grants world either. In fact, the grantor themselves have often spent lots of time creating those forms and creating extra guidelines, maybe giving even some extra slideshows or presentations to explain things. You need to respect those efforts and take the time to read up and understand what's there. Also, take the time before you pick up the phone to review those things and then call the grantor if you have questions or if you need further clarification. Again, respect their time as much as they're going to respect your time. Use the guidance at the very beginning of the project and then use it throughout the project. Don't forget that it's there. Those rules will still be the same. And if they change, you have to document that as well. In fact, newer grant programs, we have one in our state right now, is still kind of establishing forms and guidelines as we go forward through the program together. That's important though. You have an opportunity as a grantee or someone receiving those funds to help the grantor. Again, try to find places where there needs to be clarification. Work as a team with that grantor. It's never an us versus them kind of situation. In fact, one of the great, I think, organizations that we have right now is the Office of Community Development. They're working very diligently in the Louisiana Watershed Initiative program, and there have been a lot of changes to that program because it's new. But they both ask the grantees, hey, what do you think about this? And we ask them, hey, what do you think about this? We try to find that meet in the middle space where everybody is understanding the rules together and where everybody is finding a way forward together. Again, it's not an us versus them. Reviewing that guidance, even if you think that you know it by heart, helps you stay on track. It also helps you collect what you need. If there are reporting elements or if there are amendments, and you can collect it as you go along rather than, oh my gosh, the annual report is due. I have to go back through everything now. Instead, you're staying current as you go through. You also want to outline the schedule, figure out what those key milestones are to keep you on schedule. That way, you're kind of like the symphony conductor. You know, sometimes those instruments have to play together, and then sometimes there's those solo moments in a project. That's the same way here. You have to know what's coming and you have to plan ahead. You don't want a piece to be behind because you didn't start it early enough, and you don't want something to get too far ahead that now it's got to wait and drag on or maybe even be redone. So it's important to lay out that schedule and your key moments at the very beginning of the project and then stay current with that because, of course, it's going to change. In fact, one of the key things we know about grants is that there will be a project stall. There will be something that goes wrong. Now, it may be minor, it may be easily fixable, or it could be something much bigger. Because grants involve so many levels, there could be something with the program itself that's funding and providing that funding. There could be somebody on the grantor staff that changes, and their understanding of things is very different than perhaps the new person who comes in their wake. There could be changes to the grantee staff who has received the funding. All of a sudden, that person who was really good at managing everything, they're gone, out the door. Now, what are you going to do? There could be politics, either on a local, a state, or a federal level that impact all of those components. Or there could even just be agencies that have different roles within the project that may disagree about things. There's so many people involved that you have to keep them all on the same page. At that point, when something goes wrong, it's important to step back and to create a plan that keeps all of those priorities and all of those perspectives together. Focus on finding consensus and an agreed upon way for everyone to move forward. Again, look back at your guidance, look back at the rules, see what seems relevant and most important right then. And then once you've kind of figured out your plan, show that to the grantor again. Make sure to specifically highlight how your plan is aligning with the overall program and the project goals. Because remember, that money is coming from somewhere other than you. You want to make sure it's meeting that program's goals and the higher things that may be much bigger than just your single project. The third area of grants that I want to focus on today for best practice is agency coordination. And we've talked a little bit about this so far, but diving into it more, I think helps us have a good understanding of how to go forward with the grant. You'll want to talk to the grantor, whoever your key person is with that grant program, frequently. Most programs will establish a monthly or quarterly check-in, and that'll be when you have to submit a report, or maybe there's a call monthly where you just kind of talk about the progress that you've made. It may be something that you have to email in or upload to a grant portal. Those are the formal check-ins. But I find the informal check-ins are just as important. Stay in touch with that grantor. Be able to just check in on them and say, how's your day going? Make sure that you know who they are and that they know who you are, because grant programs often have residual funds. Some project may have just blown up and couldn't go forward anymore. And those monies, that funds, need to be reallocated quickly. Be the proven and trusted grantee that gets that extra funding. They'll hand it down and say, I know they can do that. They can take care of it. They can expand that project or do something a little on the side, and they'll do it the right way. That has developed because you've built that trust with the grantor. Also, you'll always want to remember, again, those guidance and the forms that you've carefully named and reviewed. You'll want to review them again before you call the grantor. Always try to research before you just ask random questions. In fact, search for rule updates or program changes. How have those impacted the grant tools? Maybe the normal things that you use may have changed tremendously based on new guidance that has come out. Be sure, as you're thinking about agency coordination, to always follow the agency instructions. If you read something and you feel like it's in conflict with another part, be sure again to find an agreed upon understanding of that. It's not just based on how you read it, it's based on how a lot of people read it. And I don't mean finding that agreed upon consensus that's sort of passive aggressive. Oh, let me just go save that in the grant file and it'll be okay. No, consensus means that everyone has a shared moment of understanding. We all agree, the grantor included. Remember, it's grandma's money. You've got to make sure they're on board with what you're doing. Another key part is when one agency may not necessarily agree with another agency. Sometimes there's permitting involved in the projects. Sometimes there's sign off on an environmental review, for example. And that involves a lot of different agencies and a lot of people putting eyes on that grant project. Well, it's your job to make sure that they're on the same page and to document again that they are on that same page. That's all things that you want to keep and make sure that they're current in the file.
All right.
So I'll have one more thing. I'll just finish. That's okay. I'll just finish with this. As we think about grant management, right now we're seeing more changes in grants, programs, and procedures than probably we've ever seen before. A tool that we've used for years is all of a sudden gone. The web page isn't found. A presidential order may say one thing and then conflict with the grant guidelines. And then a judge may declare it a totally different way. That's why finding consensus and documenting what we're doing and how we're doing is so important to the success of our projects. Overall, effective grant management is about cat herding in a lot of ways. It's project management with a lot of extra tentacles because you're not just working with one angle or with one person. You have to balance a lot of different perspectives and you have to move the whole group forward with that documentation each step that you take. In my family, we often joke that Lacey is never in any of the pictures of our family. Well, that's because I'm the one taking the pictures of the family. The selfie stick was a great, investment for us, but that's kind of what a grant manager does all along the way. You're taking the pictures, you're showing the documentation, and you're keeping all of those records so that everyone who has been involved with that project from the start to the finish knows exactly what path was taken and why that was done that way. So that's what I have to present about grants management for today. If you have questions or concerns or other things that you would like to talk about, we have a few minutes left over here at the end.
Yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. As you'll see, I've put Lacey's email address in the chat box. So if you think of a question later, you can feel free to reach out and she'll get back to you with an answer. Also, as I said earlier, this presentation was recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. Probably before the end of the week, you will receive an email when it is available. And again, if there are any topics you'd like to see us cover, please feel free to reach out. You can reach out to us through our social media pages. You can also, through our social media pages, see what topics will be coming up next for future webinars. So I'm not seeing any questions at this point. I'll give it another minute here. If anybody has a question, again, please feel free. Just type it into the chat box. Some presenters do such an amazing job that they just leave you, they give you all the information and you don't have any questions at the end.
See, that's Bud just being nice. I saw that we had lots of different people from different places who registered for this webinar. And in looking at that, I'm sure you all come with your own perspectives of grant management. Some of you may be at the very beginning and you think, oh, okay, I'm just going to follow through the guidelines and I'll make a few notes and it'll be fine. Others of you may realize what it is to manage some of the much larger grants and how all the files can just multiply and multiply with decisions and with paperwork. I know some of the challenges that we've had more recently is keeping track of both the print copies of things and the electronic copies. Because as much as we want to say that our grantors will always come and do now desktop audits post-COVID, or that they may just look at a few files here or there are still the old school programs that come to your office and want to sit down with all those hard copy files. So I think that's important for us to remember as we go forward.
We do have a question. What software tools do you use? What are your go-to platforms?
So my go-to platforms are the tried and true very basics. And the reason I say that is because they then are files that are interchangeable with most of the clients that we serve here at ELOS. For instance, most everyone has either Google Docs or has the Microsoft platforms of Word and Excel. They're familiar with those types of files and with how to open them and save them and manipulate within them. It's important to have something very basic like that, I find, rather than something that perhaps is a little fancier. We don't have per se grant management software because, again, I have found that just the tried and true spreadsheet with a basic date and a task and the key moments is a much easier way for everyone to share that information and to keep track of what is happening. So those are some of the key software components that we use.
All right, thank you, Lacey. Are there any other questions? Just type it in the chat box if you do. Let's see. Yes, we do have information about GIS services, and I can email that information to you. I'm assuming you just mean general GIS services and how they may figure into some of these projects. And if that's the case, okay, I see your answer. Yes, I have your email and I will get you that information. Thank you very much for asking.
One of the other things that I'll bring up just while we're waiting for a last question or two, there are a lot of, I guess, local entities that are looking at what type of software to use for grant management. And they may be thinking of it kind of as a records management software, or they may just be thinking of it as how do you handle all the different grants that may be coming in. Because if we think about it from a local government perspective, you may end up with 40 or 50 different grant programs at the same time and projects within each one of those. When I was with the city of Hammond, we looked several times at grant management software and we always avoided buying it. It was very expensive and it didn't really do a whole lot more than just your standard folders and files within those folders. Again, what we tried to create were tracking devices, whether that was, again, a summary sheet that had everything going on in it, which was in the root file, or other things like that. But again, it helped us throughout the years so that you didn't necessarily have to update the software and pay for all of those updates. It was a very cost-effective solution that all the different grant programs could use and receive that information from.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions. So again, I'd like to remind you that a replay will be available on our YouTube channel. Feel free to pass it along to anyone you think might benefit from the information today. And again, check with us through our LinkedIn page to see what topics are upcoming. And if you do have any suggestions for topics, something that's particularly relevant to your role or projects that you are working on, we'd love your ideas. And with that, I will thank you again for spending some time with us this afternoon. Thank you again to Lacey for giving this presentation, and have a great rest of your day.